So, what's so wrong about the music industry? And why did you assume that I was going to be saying something wrong about it? There's a lot of stuff that we know about the music industry that doesn't work how it should. And of course, as we touched on last time, we have the issue of art and commerce. And that art is something that everybody is interested in some way or another. And in this case, when we're talking about music, it's a part of most of our lives. Commerce is how this becomes a commodity, how it becomes bought and sold and moved around. And I'm sure that you've heard plenty of stories, as I have, about how dreadfully unfair the music industry is to the artists and how the industry is not run by artists. And this becomes a really limiting factor in the way that music gets played. So I'll share with you just one little story about the music industry. This is just such a trite little, nothing of a story, but it is fascinating to me. I moved to Michigan some 2009. Yeah, we moved to Michigan in 2009. We lived there for a little bit. And we were in upstate Michigan, kind of rural and everything. Beautiful place, but not much in the way of, say, modern conveniences, which was tough coming from Houston. And now I live in LA and I get a little bit used to having a Jack in the Box down the street, say. Anyway, my kid was starting at this school. It was our very first kid to go to school. And they had this welcome back to school fair where you could go and meet the teachers and all of that. And they had a band play. And the band that was playing was amazing. I mean, amazing. They were older guys, and they're up on the stage, and they are just killing it, solid. I mean, I've been to a lot of musical performances, and I was just floored that this elementary school had a band playing that was just so flawless and crisp, and they were playing a lot of 60s stuff, a lot of classic rock. And somebody told me, okay, so they played the song 96 Tears by Q and the Mysterians, by Question Mark and the Mysterians. It's a one-hit wonder, this band, Question Mark and the Mysterians. And they played the song, and they played it just so damn well. And somebody told me, that's the Mysterians. And I was like, no. And they're yeah, no, it is. And it totally was. And here's the deal. The janitor at this elementary school was in this band that played a massive hit in the 60s. It was their only hit, but it was a massive hit. And now he's a janitor at an elementary school, and the other guys all have jobs around somewhat similar to that. And I just had to go talk to these guys, right? Because that's how I am. I went up there and told them how great they sound and how it's amazing to see them here of all places. And they're like, yeah, we try to play some. And I'm like, well, that's great. I'm glad you're keeping it up. And I'm sure he could see the question on my face. And he goes, yeah, we really got screwed by the record company. And I said, yeah. And he goes, yeah, we toured all around, did all kinds of stuff. And I mean, basically gave up our lives. None of us graduated from high school. We were 17. And, we just signed the contract, not looking at it. We probably didn't make $10 from the whole thing. And I thought, man, that's depressing and predatory. Anyway, so that's just a very trite example. I'm sure that that a very, very small percentage of published musicians are making any money at all. And that even the really big musicians make much more money from, say, touring than they do from their album being played on Spotify, which is somewhat of a joke. And this isn't anything new. It's not just in Spotify, obviously, since the record companies were ripping off kids in the 60s. But they even have really had a stranglehold on radio stations for a long time. Radio stations, there used to be a lot of independent radio stations. Wherever you'd go to a new town, you'd have to find new radio stations, and they all had their own particular feel to them and that kind of thing. Well, this changed in 1996 when a Federal Communications Act was passed that made it where there were no longer any limits on how many radio stations a company can own. Just for whatever reason, they figured this is a good idea. And all of a sudden, coast to coast, you have like the same 3 or 4 companies running all of the radio stations. And, Clear Channel was a big one. CBS is a big one. And they own these radio stations, and they basically like make these little houses out of them, out of these genres. This one's for pop. This one's for rock. This one's for hip hop. And they basically charge the record companies per play. Instead of going the other direction with this, there becomes this huge pay-to-play scheme where essentially a record company could decide who was going to be a hit and who wasn't. Now, there's a big difference between what is music and what is just popular culture. All right? And I don't want to slam your favorite musicians or anything like that. But you get some groups that organically become big and famous, and they organically get there by working really hard, by playing lots of dirty gigs in lots of different places, by jumping from town to town and really polishing what it is that they do. And then finally, eventually, if they're really, really lucky, getting a record contract and working their way up from there. Other acts out there are basically created in a sort of factory-like system where the record company is like, what we need is somebody who's like Britney Spears. And they do casting, and they have a manager, and they bring in the right-looking person, and they give them the stuff to sing, and they create a whole image around them. Our music industry is far too image-driven. The way that we listen to music has much more to do with how the musician looks than it ever should have, if we're being honest. And so you have these entire boy bands and girl bands and all these different acts that have been created by the record labels that have been basically market research turned into a professional band that records music by session musicians who come in and play a bunch of songs, and then they get the kid to go up there and sing, and they auto-tune his voice, and they really work and polish the videos and the images and make posters, and voila, you have a star. And it's crazy. It's crazy. And there's a big difference between somebody who's a fan of music and somebody who's a fan of popular culture when it comes down to it. Not all of these divisions are perfectly cut and dried. It's a spectrum. You can find the most manufactured musicians out there, and you can find, some of the most authentic ones out there. But essentially, the record labels, who still control the show, regardless of the democratization of music as the radio stations have lost their influence and the internet has gained so much, they're still calling the shots out there. And they'll listen to a band, they'll listen to a group, and they'll just decide, yeah, this isn't what we want. This album has no hits. What we need is a song that's catchy and has hits on it. And this is a big flaw, because we get cheated out of some really great stuff out there. And I'd love to pull out some specific examples for you, but that's not really what this is about. But instead of that, they actually have applied a sort of horrible research science to music, and they've realized that certain things really catch on and get stuck in your head, and that they don't have to be good. That, as a matter of fact, some song can be really irritating, get stuck in your head in a way that it gets caught in a sort of cognitive loop until it begins to make some sort of sense to you, and you think you like it. That, quite frankly, there can be songs that are terrible. They're train wreck songs that you can't look away from because they have been designed to fit a space in your head. You've probably heard of the millennial whoop. The millennial whoop is a pattern of melody, an interval that gets sung by a singer or played by an instrument that happens over and over in lots of different radio songs, lots of different manufactured hits. That they found that this particular interval is really catchy, and that it's a hook. So they just start planting it in the music, right? They found that, instead of trying to break new ground, instead of trying to do something, fresh and new and inviting, it's a little bit better for them if they do something that essentially offends as few people as possible. They don't need an album to be any one fan's favorite album. They don't need a song to be any one fan's favorite song. They need it to be bland enough to not have you turn it off. Bland enough to stick around while it's being played and not turn away from it. As many people as possible. So this isn't about, hitting really high marks by being excellent and amazing and breaking new ground. This is about trying to do something as average as you possibly can that will be played averagely by the most average number of people. You don't want to exclude anybody. So that's one way that the mega hits get treated these days. That's one way that the music industry sort of changes what our audio culture really should be by manipulating it to try and find the averages that will keep getting played over and over again. The other way is beyond the averages, they do look for niches. And when they're looking for a niche, they really want to speak to your identity, just like the same way that we saw that detergent wants to speak to your identity, the same way that we saw that all of these different, barely different products that do the same thing want to be identity products rather than really appeal to your taste, the same way that cigarettes want to be identity products that you match with your identity. They want musical genres that match your identity. If you're going to be somebody who listens to like a niche music instead of just what's popular out there, they want to dig a very predictable groove for you. They want this music to reflect back your values, how you see yourself. And let me just invite you for a second to put down your guard. Put down your guard and imagine yourself walking through a mall. Crowded mall, lots of different people there. I'll bet that you can pick out anybody in that mall and just through stereotype know what kind of music they listen to. Just through stereotype. You can guess who it is that listens to country. I can guess who listens to country by their car. I can guess who listens to Slipknot by their tattoos. You can tell these things. And it's not on accident. We like to project a sense of self. We like to adopt an identity and try and project what that identity is, how we want to see ourselves. We will form our identity around our music very often because that's a commodity that decorates a life that can be sold to an identity lifestyle very easily. So, you get a bunch of really bad patriotic country songs coming out after 9/11. You have the era of gangster rap. You have these different singers who try to speak to your own imagined sex appeal. And you wear these identities. You project them out because you're in a club at this point. now you're in a sort of sub-faction of a cult, and you want to show other people that you're interested in the things that they are. So you dress in a similar way, and you listen to a similar music, and this is a really easy way to lose this whole low self-esteem thing, because you don't have to rely on being you anymore. You can rely on matching the predicted tastes of other people. You see these other people adopting this identity, and it becomes pretty clear how you can do it too. You're not going to miss this because it is so painfully obvious. In this way, you fit in. This way, you don't feel invisible, and you feel approval from a whole group of people. And the music is core to this because, again, it is something that can be sold as a lifestyle enhancement. And it's a whole body of work that can be sold as a lifestyle enhancement. And a person can only wear so many shirts. A person can only wear so many pants. A person only buys one car. A person only wears one kind of perfume or cologne. They only get one haircut. But music, when used as furnishing, can go on and on and on. And you don't buy just one album. You've got to have more than that. So you mine into these people's minds and give them back how they see themselves. This is especially important in our society, where consumerism is so firmly linked with our identities. How linked with our identities is it? Well, in mainstream American society, we don't have rites of passage. We don't have, a collective community that observes and approves of you as you get older and want to feel like you're speaking and acting with the authority of an adult. And this happens to us biologically in our teen years, where our peers become more important than our parents were, where the approval of the people around us in our same class, in our same socioeconomic status, become really important to fit in with. And it's at this time that the parents could be stepping up and trying to bring their kids into some sort of a communal culture of some sort that would have a rite of passage that brings you in to the club. And instead, in the United States, mainstream society anyway, has decided to ditch this. So once they ditch this, you're searching for an identity. You need it to be confirmed. You need validity. The music industry is here. And the music industry can confirm your identity much more powerfully than the other people around you, because they're already drinking that Kool-Aid. And the music industry will speak to your own sense of self-worth and your own sense of who you want to be. And it will amplify it to you so that you match this image. Maybe you feel like I'm making a lot out of this. But what we can do is take a look at the criticism that was piled on hip-hop in the 90s that continued through the 2000s till about 2008, when the scene started changing a little bit. And that criticism was that it was absolutely misogynist music, was that the music was all about, violence and scoring with women. Now, what was going on here was not directly misogynist, at least intent-wise. Impact-wise, sure. Intent-wise, that's not what was happening. Intent-wise, you had an identity song that wanted to flex on other men, that wanted to compare your accomplishments with the accomplishments of other men around you, that wanted to one-up the next guy. So teenagers who are lacking a sort of cultural approval step into this other approval where they want to one-up their peers to fit in, which is a profoundly male way that we socialize people into trying to tell people stories about your accomplishments and your deeds and what a badass you are, and that somebody else is going to try to knock you off with their story about how badass they are. And it's not badass like you're walking old ladies across the street. It's that you are dominating other men through your own power and aggression and allure. So this music was competitive with each other. It was made to be very competitive and show rising above hardships and show a sort of grit in the face of adversity, which mirrors the lives of the people who developed hip hop, mirrored the social status and economic system that they were in, but then added on this sort of one-upmanship that got bigger and bigger as the music industry started really, really digging this. And this one-upmanship, a lot of it had to do with how many women you could score with. And that became part of a social identity of an entire generation for a long time. And it wasn't until much later that you had a lot of very compelling women artists come into the scene, and you had some of the men artists who were introducing other lines of thought and other sort of emotional depths within the music that we saw it really change. And, you know, any music can really be criticized for this still, of course. It's reflecting a culture that's highly misogynistic and paternal and everything. So we do see the way that our record industry influences the way we interact with each other by getting you to work on yourself into becoming a target market. By telling you, these are the identities available to you. Are you a heavy metal dude? Are you a country guy? Are you into R&B? Pop? What is it that you are? And inviting you to become this image that becomes very easy to sell to. It becomes very simple to sell to someone who identifies with an entire way of life. And the furnishing of this is really coming from the music industry. And the furnishing of this is really doing market research and seeing people who listen to this type of music like this type of thing, let's give them more of it. And maybe they didn't come up with these stereotypes, but they do perpetuate them. They do perpetuate them and feed into them. And more, you have like all the people listening to country being like, yay guns. And all the people listening to hip hop being like, yay guns. And we've seen some shifts away from that. And we've seen some breaking down of silos lately. There has been democratization as people have started carrying music with them wherever they go. Their entire music libraries, more or less. And I'm not saying that the music that's coming out of all of this is all bad. Not all of it. But it is really insidious to see the way they want you to locate yourself in what they're selling. And to mold yourself into someone that becomes easier to sell to. And even worse is how well that works. And even worse than that is this denial that this is about consumption. The idea that it's about artistry and beauty. That sneaks in. It sneaks through here and there. It used to have better outlets. But now it's very much a machine. And is part of the machine through which we live our lives.